So Joe, a lot of people already know you in the material science community and the electron microscopy community, but for those of you who don't, can you briefly tell us a little bit about yourself and your background?
Yeah, my name's Joe Michael. I've spent 32 years at Sandia National Labs. I'm now retired. Prior to that, I spent 8 years at Bethlehem Steel in the research department. And prior to that, I did my BS, MS, and PhD in metallurgy and material science at Lehigh University. When I was in high school, one of our teachers got a hold of an old RCA EMU2 TEM. And these were old 50 kV microscopes, and we took it apart. I learned about vacuum systems, electronics, and how an EM works, and that was the start of it.
After you received your Strata DB235, how long was it before you recognized that it could be useful for TEM sample prep, or was that kind of out of the gate, you already knew that that's what you wanted to do?
Yeah, we knew right away we wanted to make TEM samples with it, and that was one of the primary focuses, was to get away from the traditional methods of making TEM samples, which are time consuming, and you can't be really responsive with those sorts of approaches. So 2 or 3 days to make a good TEM sample is not adequate. We did a lot of metal work at first, a lot of metal samples, and then we branched out into semiconductors, obviously, because that's another big use, understanding the structures of your semiconductor devices. We also did quite a bit of early ceramics work, working on ceramics and making thin foils of ceramics, because they tended to be more difficult than metals. You couldn't electropolish a ceramic. Ion milling them was somewhat difficult, but the FIB really allowed us to make great site-specific TEM samples of ceramics as well.
Kind of around 2006, you got your second dual beam, which was the Helios 600. And at that moment, you had the opportunity to have both the Strata DB235 and the Helios in the same lab. And I'm wondering, what comes to your mind as what the big technology advances were with that newer microscope and what it enabled in your lab?
The new Helios that we got in 2006 was much more automated. We could go make a TEM sample from start to finish using the automated routines, which we thought that was close to magic, the way it worked. And I think that's one of the advantages of Thermo Fisher. They've always been at the forefront of automation procedures for making TEM samples or cross sections or anything with the FIB.
So your team purchased, in the end, it was a Helios 5 laser P-FIB. So it has the ability to obviously do plasma FIB milling. Beyond that, with the laser, how do you see kind of laser being used for material science moving forward?
I think the laser is a real advantage. It's where you need to do deeper sectioning, for example. If you want to cut deeper than a couple hundred microns, the laser can get you there very quickly. And so the laser really helps extend the P-FIB and the FIB technology from these small cross sections that we're used to, going from the gallium, which was maybe 20 by 10, to the P-FIB, which is maybe twice that for a TEM sample. Now with the laser, you can begin to cut much larger areas, millimeter-sized areas, macroscopic areas that give you a better idea of the general microstructure of the sample. And it does it quickly with very little damage.
If you apply that filter of new materials that we are seeing kind of arise, and also some of the challenges associated with them, whether it's beam sensitivity or even air sensitivity, how do you kind of overlay the use and the utility of electron microscopy and focused ion beam technology there?
I think we're at the point where the details of the sample, material, and the fine scale details are now the important part. The newer materials, for example, semiconductors, there's always newer materials in there. Everything's getting smaller. You absolutely can't do it optically anymore. So that sort of push to smaller and smaller feature sizes is driving the need for better and better microscopes and better FIBs for making the samples you need to look at. So there's that area where things are getting smaller. The area of energy, batteries, for example, are becoming of increased interest everywhere. And so using the FIB to understand, and all our characterization tools to understand what's going on inside a battery is becoming quite important. And that's where some of the cryo methods are becoming very useful. I think the addition of the cryo capability to a fib is really important. It used to be for biology, it became one of the most important techniques, cryofib and making cryo sections for biology. Well, I'm thinking that in the future, we're going to do a lot more of that with materials.
Along the way, there's been, I think, a huge set of advances, whether it's improving the SEM, as you mentioned, for low voltage imaging, but also improving the focused ion beam for low voltage polishing and better throughput. Those are kind of the two things that always stand out in my mind. And I agree, as you've always pushed us, the automation has gotten better over time.
Absolutely.
And I think it would have been hard for us to imagine that we would have, fully automated sample preparation, including lift out, 20 years ago, but we're here and it's indeed a reality. Thanks a lot for sharing your ideas on, over the years, what we need and helping making it happen, and also telling us a little bit about the history of that first dual beam in your lab, because that's, I think, a great story.
Thank you.